Good morning, everyone. We're starting this morning the portion of Terumah, and I'm sharing with you a summary of the Rebbe's talk, the first talk to Terumah in Likutei Sichos, volume 16. Before we go through the questions and debates and discussions, I want to share with you what the topic and some details that will be better understood later on. The first few words of the portion is Hashem spoke to Moshe, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the Jewish people, ve'ikhu li truma. The word ve'ikhu means let them take. Li, to me. Truma, contribution. That's what in Hebrew we call it. There are, Rashi immediately says, ve'ikhu li truma, let them take for me truma. It says li, with li, what does it mean li to me? Lishmi. Lishmi means for my sake. Meaning that when you give contribution, you have to do it for God's sake. The Rebbe is asking many questions. The first question the Rebbe is going to ask is, the word li, that is for God's sake, is a new invention by Rashi now. But the word li appears before many times and Rashi does not bother. In Bo, in portion of Bo, we read, Kadesh li kol bechor, sanctify to me every firstborn. The word li is not for my sake, it's for me, for God. Aser asrenu lach. Jacob, when he makes a vow with God to protect him while he's running away from his brother, he says, everything you give me, I'll tithe. Aser is 1 of 10. Aser asrenu lach. I'll tithe to you. What do you mean to you? Can you give it to God? Obviously, you take it away from you and you give it to needy people. That's how you give it to God. So why over here, ve'ikhu li truma, is Rashi bothered? Then the word Terumah bothered the Rebbe. What does Terumah means? Contribution. What does that mean? And the Rebbe says that it has two different meanings. One meaning is, the simple, in my opinion, is to elevate. In other words, take something that's mundane and make it holy. How do you make it holy? By elevating it. Like the days of the week, we have Shabbat. What's Shabbat? Shabbat is considered Terumah of the week. It's the elevation. So when you take a coin, you take a sheep, you take whatever it is for God, you're elevating it. That's why it's called Terumah, because the word Terumah in Hebrew means leharim. Leharim is to lift. Aramat mishkolot, a weight bouncer, someone who lifts weights, we call it merim mishkolot. Mishkal is weight. Someone who lifts. So Terumah is not contribution. It's a translation of that word, very loose translation. The real word Terumah means leharim, meaning to lift. That's one word of Terumah. Another meaning is to be separated, to separate. It says in the Torah many times when God wants us to separate one part, let's say the Kohanim get their part from the animal, there are 3 parts of the animal that the Kohanim have that, or that a poor man gets the corner of the field, it says over there Terumah. Terumah, not its contribution, it means it's separate from the rest. So the word Terumah can mean 2 different things. The third question the Rebbe is bothered by, why does it say ve'ikhu? Ve'ikhu means let them take. You don't take, you give. It should say ve'itnu, matanot la'evyonim. Matana is a gift. Why is it called matana is a gift? Because you give it to somebody. When you give gifts to the poor, you call it matanot la'evyonim. But when you want to give a contribution, you say ve'itnu li truma, let them give to me. Ve'ikhu means let them take, which is the opposite. A man who gives does not take, he is giving. So there are different commentaries explain that when you give, you actually take back, you get 10 times as much. There is all kinds of explanations, but the Rebbe wants to stick to the Rashi. So these are the 3 points that the Rebbe, all 3 words the Rebbe is bothered by. I'm deviating from the order of the Rebbe and the way the Rebbe takes it, but it's all in the Rebbe's words. The first word, ve'ikhu, should say ve'itnu. The second word, li, to me, what does it mean to me? Rashi says, for my sake. Says the Rebbe, the word li appears previously, as Sarasota lach and li is the same. Also in the Bo, Kadesh li kol bechor, and the Rebbe says it appears later on in other places, and Rashi does not bother to explain. So li means for God's sake. Why Rashi has to teach it to us? And the third one is, what does the word Terumah means? Terumah, says the Rebbe, if you look in the sages, you'll find two explanations. One is lifting it up. When you dedicate it to God, you're lifting it. And another one is you separating it. In other words, you're not allowed to benefit from it. You're not allowed to use it because it has to go out of your ownership. Says the Rebbe, if you look at the halachic ruling regarding change of contribution purpose. Again, I'm going backwards, but I believe that it will help understand better. There is a dispute between Rambam and Ravad, Rabbi Avraham ben David, I think. He will always argue with Rambam. Is this disagreement appear in Rambam? There is a side note. The rule in the Torah is that if I dedicated an animal for Olah is a complete dedication to God, I cannot change it to Shlamim, to a piecemeal offering where everybody can take a share, and vice versa. Once I dedicate an animal for, it's called Kodshei Mizbeach, for Mizbeach sanctity, for the altar sanctity, there is no changes. You cannot change it from one animal or from one purpose to the other. And the reason is, anytime you change, someone might lose. Either the Kohanim might have less food, or the owner might have less food or more, or the altar, God will receive less. In other words, every sacrifice, the share or the division between God, the owners, and the Kohanim is divided differently. And therefore, even though a contribution is an umbrella that it includes different types of sacrifices, todah, thankful offering, piecemeal offering, complete offering, yet they are each have different sections given to God, to the Kohen, to the. So therefore, if I say I'm going to give a thankful offering, you cannot make it a piecemeal offering. However, if I dedicate it for the Kodshei Bedek Habayit, I'm contributing for the temple maintenance or upkeep, am I allowed to change? For example, they come and say to me, they need to fix the doors. Can you help? And it says here, that's for fixing of the doors. Later on, they decided they need to buy garments to the Kohen because they did change their garments all the time. They wore only new. High priest, by the way, would change, I believe, every day, even if I'm not mistaken. Or the one who, but they the garments were not worn too long. Question is, can I change it? After all, I'm giving it to God. So even though I said I'm giving it for fixing the door, I say now I'm changing my mind. So when they actually swipe my credit card, I say, the gabbai, the sexton, the one in charge, comes to me and says, I think we raised enough for the door. Can we use it for the new shirts for the priests? Or for fixing the bridge or the steps leading in Azara, in the yard? Am I allowed to or not? Rambam writes that you're allowed to, in this category, you're allowed to change from one to the other. Ravad, the one who argued with him, he is of the opinion you cannot change. Just like for the altar, dedication to the altar must remain exactly for what the purpose was set at the outset, so is in God's temple. Whenever you give something, that's where it should go without deviation. Am I recording? I think I'm recording. Okay. So again, Rambam is of the opinion you can change in the contribution for the upkeep and maintenance, but you cannot change when it comes to sacrifices. Chabad is of the opinion you cannot change either one. What is Rashi following? Rashi in the Talmud, in Shas, Rashi in the Gemara follows Rambam. Rashi says you cannot change sacrifices, but you can change a contribution that was dedicated for the upkeep of the temple. Why is it important, says the Rebbe? Based on the two interpretations of Terumah, either separation or lifting, both are about God more than the person. What happened when you give a contribution? Rashi says the word terumah means to separate. To separate means it's not yours anymore. So therefore, whatever the needs are, it can be used for. To lift it, the same thing. You lift it, why? Because it came to God's domain. If it came to God's domain, you have no say anymore. In other words, if you are counting my say, the contributor's say, you cannot say that it's completely separated from me. You cannot say it's completely lifted, because if it's lifted, why there are strings attached? Why do I have to restrict that giving to the words that I said when I gave it? Therefore, says the Rebbe, Rashi can accommodate both words of terumah, either to separate it from the owner, from the giver, or to lift it. In both ways, once it came to the hands or the ownership or the property of the temple, the Gabbai, those in charge, can dedicate it to whichever way they want, as opposed to sacrifices what they can.
In this sense, you can generalize and say, once you give a contribution, it's not up to you to where it goes. The person receiving the temple will
so how are you saying that in general the rule should apply across the board? First, we just discovered that when it comes to sacrifices, it's not debatable. You cannot change.
I mean, I'm talking about the temple.
Just a minute.
Sorry.
Second, in the temple, you have a debate, you have an argument. I don't know what the ruling is, but Rashi follows Rambam that you're allowed to change. Third, I think that you have to understand, if someone says specific for he wants it for the building of, by the way, there is laws regarding if a community collects for a Torah, they are allowed to, let's say there is enough, sufficient money. What should they do with the remainder? There is a law that they're allowed to use it for other projects, provided they are not lesser in holiness or obligation than the Torah. Unless
everything is less.
no, the building of a synagogue.
What?
The building of a synagogue is a lesser.
With the Torah?
No, it's below.
So that's the point.
So if I raise some for the building of a synagogue and I had enough money, I came to you and says, give me $100 for the building of a synagogue. And that $100, by the time you gave me, I already finished paying for everything. I can use it for writing a Torah.
But not the other way around.
But not the other way around. Therefore, when we start fundraising, we need to know Jewish law. So when I do a fundraising, I make a condition at the outset. And I stipulate that every penny we're going to raise is going to be used for the purpose we announce, provided we need it for that purpose. Should we not need it, it is as if when we took the money, it wasn't meant for that purpose. So for example, building of a mikveh is even higher than Torah.
Yeah.
So if you have money left for building of a mikveh, you may not be able to use it to build a synagogue. You may not have even for a Torah. You can use it to build another synagogue, another community, even if you collect for a local mikveh. But you cannot change it to a lesser priority point. Did I answer your question, Harry? Okay. Now, the Rebbe says that what's remained to explain is two real points that are important. One is, why does it say let them take, not give? Remember why I asked this question at the beginning? Mm-hmm. It should say ve'yitnu litruma, let them give a contribution, not ve'ikhu, let them take. And the second question the Rebbe says is Rashi tells us that the word li, to me, meaning for my sake. It has to be done for God's sake. When you give a contribution, do it for God's sake. So, Xavier, I don't understand. We're talking about three categories of contributions in the text immediately about this contribution, and the rule is that you can force people to give it. There are three contributions that this paragraph is talking about. One is for the Adanim, to the foundations of the Mishkan. Each one had to give a half a shekel. Another one is for sacrifices. Each one had to give a half a shekel, no more, no less. And the third one is for the construction of the tabernacle, the temple. For that, anyone gives as much as they want. The first two, which is half a shekel, you have no choice. They're going to take it if you like it or not. In other words, we can go after the person and force them to pay. We go to his bank account and we draw the half a shekel for each person in the household. Question is, Rashi says, "Ve'ikhu li lishmi," lishmi meaning for my sake, yet we can take it against his will. If you take it against his will, there is no dedication in his mind for God's sake. So, Rabbi, actually, those two questions are answered one with the other. That's why God says, let them take. There is the Gabbai, the fundraiser, the man in charge, the executor who is going to collect, the collector. The collector has to have in mind that he's taking it for God's sake. And therefore, you can force it. That's why Rashi says, Lishmi. Ve'yikhu, let them take. God is speaking to who? To the collector, not to the giver. Li, for my sake, for me. And therefore, if someone refuses to give, you can go after him. Take his pet. Take his collectible watch. Take whatever he possesses, sell it, and do it. Even if it is against his will. You know why? Because you do it for my sake. And that's enough. And the Rebbe goes on to say that from here, we learn about our conduct with our relationship to others. Because when it comes to the building of the tabernacle, you might think that we're dealing only with the physical structure that they built in the temple, in the desert. But it's not true. I am instructed to build a temple. You are, each one of us is instructed to build a temple. Our way of building the temple is hinted to in this Torah, in that section. And that, therefore, sometimes when we're dedicating ourselves to God, it's divided into two parts. One is refraining from negative, and the other one is positive. Sur meira, refrain from misbehaving, v'aseh tov, and do good. In other words, don't lose your temper, don't lie, don't violate Jewish law. And the other way to build a temple is do good, eat kosher, study Torah, pray to God, celebrate, come to minyan. In the idea of sur meira, do not do negative, the intention don't matter. It doesn't matter why you don't eat kosher. You hate it, or someone is watching, or someone is not going to do business with you if you don't keep kosher. It doesn't matter. As long as you are out, staying out of trouble, you are doing well. When it comes to v'aseh tov, doing good, seemingly you should have the intention that you're doing it for God's sake. I celebrate Shabbat because God asked me to do that, even though it makes sense, even though it's very healthy, it cleans my head, it gives me a restart for the week. For whatever reason, I eat kosher not because it's healthy. I do circumcision not because it's beneficial. I do it because God said. In other words, it has to be li lishmi. Says the Rebbe, when someone refuses to do good, to give the coin, what do? You go to the Gabbai, to the collector, and you say, you do it, you force it to him. But from the Gabbai point of view, he's doing positive. He is bringing the shekel to the temple. Over there, the Torah says, lishmi, it has to be for my sake. We need to understand that whenever, says the Rebbe, the point to be learned from here is that whenever I make someone do good, even though for that person it's kind of forcing it on him, it's kind of convincing him against his will, you might think that for him, so it doesn't matter if I have the right intention or not. From here we learn that when you go after somebody else to try and inspire somebody, to try and make someone change and do the right thing, you must have the right intention. That's why God says that the Gabbai, the collector, That's Rashi. Ve'ikhu, when they collect, when they pick it up, they have to do it lishmi, for God's sake. And therefore, even though they do it against the will of that person, and since he's doing it against his will, perhaps the intention is not important. Therefore, God says, no, the intention is important, because for you, for the collector, is doing positive. And therefore, we need to learn, says the Rebbe, that whenever we have influence on another person, even if we try to convince them by different means, and we say, oh, what counts is only the action. As long as the action is right, we'll be happy. It's not enough. We need to make it with the proper intention to serve God, and therefore to connect that person to God. And now we can understand why it says ve'yikhu, because it refers to the collectors. It says li, for my sake, because the collector must have the proper intention, and terumah, to lift it up or to separate it, because when the gabbai, when the collector takes it out, he's actually removing it from that person and he's lifting it. Both interpretations can fit here, and by doing so, we are serving God appropriately.
I see that the collector have no choice but to have to do it the right way. You've been given the task.
Perhaps he gets paid to fill the bucket with $150. It's not the right intention. He gets his cut.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe he starts thinking to himself, we're doing this for God. I mean, I'm doing it for me, he's not doing it for himself. He gets his cut, he's doing it.
They say to him, you go to a theater, no entry to a theater unless you can prove you paid a half a shekel. And therefore he does it so he can go partying with his wife. There are many, many reasons other than the right reason.
You pick a collector who will have the right reason.
That's you.
That's for sure.
Shabbos, everybody.
Well, that's